Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a feeling that, well, you probably know all too well. Have you ever just felt like human existence is this endless, exhausting cycle? We've all been there. Well, today we are looking at the exact philosopher who diagnosed why we feel this way. He was a guy so famously cynical that he actually earned himself the nickname, the Uncle of Despair.
So, let's start here. Is life literally just an endless, repetitive loop? Seriously, think about the modern rat race we're all stuck in today. We go to school, we get a job, we pay the bills, maybe raise some kids, pay even more bills, and then, eventually, we die. We are just constantly chasing the next milestone, that next little dopamine hit, always convincing ourselves that, hey, this time, it'll finally bring us lasting peace.
You know, this whole vibe is brilliantly captured by the ancient Greek myth of Sisyphus. He was this figure condemned to roll a massive boulder up a really steep mountain for eternity. But the catch? Right before he reached the top, the boulder would slip and roll all the way back down. This is the perfect analogy for how our fleeting, everyday moments of happiness actually operate. Just when we think we've hit the absolute peak of contentment, boom, the boulder slips away and we're right back at the bottom, sweating and starting all over again.
Part 1. A tragic, wealthy childhood. Okay, so this is where we officially meet Arthur Schopenhauer. Born in 1788 into extreme wealth, he was a guy handed literally every material advantage you could ask for. Yet somehow, he was destined to become history's ultimate philosopher of pessimism. His youth was, to put it mildly, deeply turbulent. Back in 1803, he went on this massive European tour, and it exposed him not just to high society, but to the brutal, extreme poverty of the masses, including a really traumatizing visit to some notorious French prisons. Then, in 1805, absolute tragedy struck when his father died by suicide, and shortly after that, his mother, who was a popular socialite and writer, essentially just left him behind to go pursue a glamorous life of parties. So witnessing all this deep worldly suffering, combined with a loveless, totally disconnected childhood, really planted the deep seeds of his incredibly dark worldview.
Part 2. The world as blind will. To really understand Schopenhauer, we first have to take a quick detour to look at the immense influence of Immanuel Kant. Kant proposed this absolutely brilliant idea regarding the divide between the world of appearances and the thing in itself. Imagine for a second that you were born wearing red-tinted glasses that you can literally never take off. Everything you look at is going to seem red, right? You experience the entire world purely through that filter. That is the world of appearances. It's how our human minds naturally structure and filter reality. But behind those glasses is the thing in itself, the true objective nature of reality that exists completely independently of our perception. Now, Kant famously said we could never ever truly know this hidden reality.
But Schopenhauer, he totally disagreed. In fact, he claimed he'd made a major and honestly kind of terrifying breakthrough. He genuinely believed he had successfully identified this hidden fundamental reality beneath our mental filter. And he named this force the will.
So what exactly is this force? Well, according to Schopenhauer, the will isn't some thoughtful, loving creator. Not at all. It is a blind, completely irrational force with absolutely zero logic and no ultimate goal whatsoever. Its one and only desire is the endless mechanical continuation of life. Think of the will like a blind driver pushing us to act on raw instincts. When you grab a glass of water, you aren't making some logical, highly calculated deduction about your cellular hydration levels. No, you drink because you feel a blind, urgent thirst. The will is what drives all human actions right from the shadows.
And it gets wilder, because Schopenhauer argued that the will actually manifests physically in our biology. It's like a three-step process. First, the will creates a blind urge, let's say hunger. Over millions of years, the body then develops physical tools, like teeth or an entire digestive system, purely to satisfy that specific urge. And why? Also, life can just continue endlessly. So your physical body, according to him, is quite literally the physical embodiment of the will's endless cravings.
Now, if this is starting to sound a bit like Eastern philosophy, you hit the nail on the head. This realization perfectly mirrored his deep study of the Upanishads and Buddhist thought. He connected his own personal despair and his whole concept of the will directly to the Sanskrit term dukkha. That translates to the fundamental unsatisfactoriness, suffering, and painfulness of mundane life. Because we're constantly driven by a will that just wants and wants, we are fundamentally doomed to be constantly dissatisfied.
Part 3. The pendulum of suffering.
So why did he think lasting happiness was biologically impossible for us?
Because, as Schopenhauer famously put it, life swings like a pendulum, backward and forward between pain and boredom. Let's break that down for a second. You have a painful desire. Say, you really want a promotion at work. The lack of that promotion causes you actual anxiety. You strive, you work incredibly hard, and boom, finally you get it. The pain of wanting is gone. But what happens next? Almost immediately, you just get used to it. You become bored. And to cure that boredom, your brain immediately invents a brand new desire to chase, swinging you right back into the pain of wanting. It's an absolute trap.
And the sources reveal that Schopenhauer identified one very specific biological drive as the ultimate, inescapable trap: reproduction. He didn't view romance and love as these beautiful human connections. No, he saw them as the will's absolute cruelest trick. From his perspective, the will uses the illusion of romantic happiness purely as a tool to trick humanity into prolonging its own existence, effectively trapping an entirely new generation in the exact same cycle of endless suffering.
Now, looking at the texts impartially, we have to acknowledge how this rigid philosophical framework, especially when combined with his own personal history, manifested into extreme misogyny. The roots of this dark byproduct are highly specific. First off, he held a deep, unresolved resentment toward his mother's extravagant behavior after his father's death, which created a lifelong personal bias. Second, because he viewed reproduction as the ultimate trap of the will, he fundamentally blamed women, seeing them merely as tools of the will designed to continue the cycle of birth. It really is a stark example of how deeply personal grievances can heavily distort a philosopher's worldview.
Part 4. Isolation and Rivalry.
As you can probably guess, a worldview this depressing wasn't exactly a massive hit in the highly optimistic circles of 19th century Europe. When Schopenhauer finally got a chance to teach at the University of Berlin, his arch-rival was the massively popular philosopher Hegel. Schopenhauer completely hated Hegel's complex, optimistic philosophy. So, in an act of pure, unadulterated arrogance, Schopenhauer deliberately scheduled his classes at the exact same time as Hegel's. The result? Well, Hegel's lecture halls were packed to the absolute brim, while Schopenhauer was left speaking to a virtually empty room.
So, defeated by the academic world, Schopenhauer retreated to the city of Frankfurt, where he lived in strict isolation for 27 years. He truly practiced what he preached too. He completely distanced himself from society, keeping a rigid daily routine of reading, practicing the flute, and walking his only companion, a poodle named Atma, which fittingly means soul in Sanskrit.
Part 5. Finding Peace Through Art.
Okay, so if we are indeed trapped by this evil, blind will, are we just completely doomed? Fortunately, no. Schopenhauer actually prescribed antidotes. His first is rational asceticism. This basically involves using our powerful human intellect to actively observe, understand, and purposefully deny our bodily urges. When you feel a desperate craving, Schopenhauer says you should use your rational mind to step back, observe the craving as just a trick of the will, and actively say no. By consciously denying the urge, you actually loosen the will's grip on you.
But his second antidote, and perhaps his ultimate escape, is way more accessible for the rest of us: aesthetic beauty. Schopenhauer believed that when we become completely, utterly absorbed in a profound piece of art or music, we momentarily escape the will entirely. You literally stop wanting. You aren't hungry, you aren't ambitious, you are simply observing beauty. For that brief moment, the constant striving just shuts off.
Let's look at his absolute favorite example, Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. You know those famous heavy opening notes? They create this immense tension and dread, which perfectly mimics the stressful suffering of the will. But as the melody develops, it slowly transitions into this beautiful acceptance of fate. And finally, the listener achieves a temporary state of peace. For those few minutes, lost in the music, you are entirely free.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative thought. Can we ever truly escape the endless demands of our own will? As you go about your day today, I challenge you to just observe your own desires. Watch that pendulum swing in real time from wanting right over to boredom. Is true, lasting contentment actually possible? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the world around you.